Well, I'm gonna steal from the Special Operations Forces truce is like humans are more important than hardware. So I think the success of your company is gonna come down to the people that you hire.
Hello, I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. There are so many details to discuss in terms of complex sales. There's no end of topics to talk about. Today, we're going to talk with someone who's an expert in what I think is really mental toughness and a training mindset that are critical to sales. Today, I'm excited to talk with Sean Hurd. Sean recently helped build Shift Group's Veterans Sales Program, building on recent lessons learned as a SaaS and manufacturing sales rep. And that's cool. But that's not what really sets his bio and background apart from so many other sales folks. He only jumped into sales after retiring from the U.S. Army as a sergeant major. Sean spent his entire 22-year career in special operations as a U.S. Army Ranger and Special Forces operator. Many people know him as Green Berets. 8 combat tours to various conflicts in the Middle East, Scuba instructor, all kinds of stuff. And I'm sure we're going to hear about much of it in the context of his preparation for sales. So from the battlefield and senior non-commissioned officer to sales and junior business development rep, let's go. Welcome, Sean. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, appreciate it, Ed. I've been looking forward to meeting up with you for this since we met about I think it was last year, and we discussed some like common backgrounds and talked about sales and all that stuff. So I was looking forward to this. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. I'm pumped
Yeah.
for it. And I think it's going to be a fascinating session for everyone listening. So let's start a little bit, just about Sean. Most people that haven't been in the military, hear Special Forces, hear Ranger Regiment, they have their own ideas what that means. We're definitely going to jump into sales. But first, give us some context. Tell us, where you grew up, about your Army career, what De Oppressor Liber means, and the kind of work that you did.
Yeah, so like a lot of people that joined the military, my family had a background in the military. I used to have a boss that called the military a family sport, right? So like my grandpa was in World War II on a bomber as like a part of the crew there that did
Have you been watching that show on Apple lately?
Yeah, that's what it's amazing because my grandpa he did 30 missions and I
Oh
have
my
it
goodness.
I have his journal of every mission he went on. So like now
Wow.
I kind of get to visualize it. I kind of knew from watching other stuff and going to the museum when I was younger, the 8th Air Force Museum. But yeah, so he was World War II in the Army Air Force, a bomber. And then my uncle was an old school Army Ranger LURS guy back when the Rangers were like more recon type stuff.
Right.
So when I graduated high school, like I called him and he was a sergeant major at the time. And I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about joining the Army." And he was like, the only route, like he told me, was to go to a Ranger Regiment. Like that was the only route. So like that was like my goal from the beginning. And so when I joined the Army in '99, I went to obviously infantry basic training, and then I went to airborne school, and then I went to what they called it at the time the Ranger Indoctrination Program, which was like a program where you tried out to be in the 75th Ranger Regiment, and then from there I made it, and I was assigned to the second for the 75th Ranger Battalion as a private and as my first unit, which is I would say it probably still is, but it's probably one of the hardest things you can do as a young person in the military. It was a pretty demanding unit to be in, but I want to change it for the world because I think it built me into the man I am today. I can between playing sports in high school and then my parents and then being a Ranger Regiment, I think that played a lot into who I am today.
Right.
Just to speed it up a little bit, I served almost a little over between 3 and 4 years there, and I went to Special Forces selection. I got selected to attend the Special Forces qualification course, and the the towers were hit on 9/11. And
So you were in the Q course when 9/11 happened?
no, I was waiting to attend the Q course. And so I was on the job training with First Special Forces Group that was like co-located on Fort Lewis with Second Ranger Battalion, and I had a decision to make. It was either keep going and go to the Q course, or I went back to Ranger Battalion and kind of said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was leaving you guys. Do you mind if I like come back?" Because I knew they were probably going to be at the tip of the spear,
right,
of whatever happens. Like I didn't know at the time what was supposed to happen, but we ended up I ended up going back to Ranger Regiment and deployed in 2002 to recover. And this is kind of good timing. I mean, not good. I don't know how to explain it, but 2 days ago was the anniversary of a mission called it was Operation Anaconda at Roberts Ridge, where there's a couple Medal of Honors earned and stuff like that. Well, we got called to relieve the Ranger platoon that took heavy casualties that day. So like we were just sitting there at Fort Lewis. Next thing you know, like 24 hours later, I'm on a plane to Afghanistan to relieve that platoon that took heavy casualties. And my first ever combat mission was to recover that helicopter that was stuck out there on Roberts Ridge. That was my very first mission ever. So kind of cool. I got pictures and stuff from it that I need to provide to the historians probably, but they're pretty cool. And then when I got back from that deployment, I decided to then go attend the Special Forces qualification course, where I went there, graduated as a Special Forces weapons sergeant, and where I was assigned to 5th Special Forces Group.
So this is around 04 now?
Oh, yeah, 03, 04, something like that.
And real quick, help everyone understand what a weapons sergeant means. What does he do or she do? I guess he.
Yeah, so like the unique thing about a Special Forces team is there's 4 core like duties on the team to make us kind of self-sustainable. And you have a weapons sergeant who's responsible for like being an expert at like foreign weapons, all the weapons on the team, and the training actually for the team, like all the tactical training. And then you have engineers, medics, and communication guys. So like I was assigned to the weapons thing, which kind of was partly because of my background as a ranger. And I like I said, I went to 5th Special Forces Group, which at the time, since Special Forces is a area culturally oriented organization, 5th Special Forces Group was our area operation was the Middle East, and that was right when Iraq kicked off. So
and just real quick, obviously the Ranger Regiment is a direct action unit. Its goal is to go in and beat people up. What's the mission of the Special Forces? People may not completely understand that.
Yeah, so I actually go do this a lot because I'd explain this to JR and everything to get us spun. But I would say the best way to put it is like by, with, and through, right? So like you said, de oppressor liber means free the oppressed. So we have a background on working with by, with, and through like indigenous or foreign forces to help like them achieve, whatever national security objectives either U.S. or their country has, right?
So coaching, mentoring, leading to some extent, training them.
Yeah. So like it's when you're in the Rangers, you get assigned a mission, you go do it. When you're in Special Forces, usually your mission involves like working with some sort of like partner force that's foreign. So that's why we learn languages and they teach us culture, and they assign us to a unit. We usually don't leave that often, only to be instructors, because we're experts at that area of the world. We speak the languages in that world. We build relationships with like key people in that part of the world. Like for me, I still am friends with like generals in Lebanon and colonels in Jordan and all that type of stuff. And we still talk on social media and stuff like that.
So you went back down range for the second time now with 5th Group.
Yeah, multiple times. Like, cause I got there right, after the invasion of Iraq. I missed that. I was in a Q course, but when I showed up the 5th Group, it was essentially 4 months in Iraq, 8 months home, 4 months in Iraq. for I want to say it was like 4 or 5 years, and then I left to go be doing my instructor time for professional development, and I got lucky. I guess I didn't get lucky because I had to go to the school to. But it was I actually grew up in the Florida Keys, and I'm a big water guy. So I went to dive school, and I was never even on a dive team or anything. But I went to dive school with hopes if I ever had to go be an instructor, I would get sent to Key West to go be a dive instructor, and my plan worked out. Right. So,
And for people that aren't familiar, that dive school is reputed to be one of the toughest schools in the military.
like I'm in the Army for sure. Like there's the water is this, I've seen grown combat vet hardened men, like the water just like takes them out. But yeah, it's pretty hard. But I went down there and I got to do that instructor gig for 3 years. And then I went back to fifth group, and I came back out one time to go be the first sergeant for our school at our big school for that creates Green Berets. And then I made sergeant major and went back to fifth group. Went to Syria, did that whole, so I did Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And I went to Syria a couple times, and then my last duty station was down here in Tampa, Florida. They say again, I kind of steered it that way because I wanted to retire in my home state, where I taught at the Joint Special Operations University in our Senior Enlisted Academy, where I taught E9s from all four services, all the SOF special ops, E9s, E8s, and professional military education.
And help people understand, when you say first sergeant, when you say sergeant major, that may not translate. People may not really understand the significance of that and the magnitude of that role, the gravitas that it carries, the fire that it breathes. How would you describe those two positions?
Well, like I think they're probably the most important. They're not the funnest jobs in the military, but they're the most important because like you have two really duties of both of those jobs, and they're similar. One is you're responsible for the health and welfare and the professional development of all the enlisted and the training. Sorry, in the training of all the enlisted members in your formation. But secondly, you're like the senior enlisted advisor to your commander. So the way I like to put it in like civilian terms is like the commander would be the CEO, and I'd be his like chief operating officer, right? And so usually the enlisted person has way more experience in the military than the commander does. And so the commander leans on his senior enlisted advisor and then once you're up at first sergeant and sergeant major, you're starting to work with colonels, right? And they lean on you for a lot of advice, both tactically and administratively to keep the formation successful.
And do you have any sense of what percentage of NCOs actually attain the sergeant major rank?
And I guess it's different in every career field, but it's pretty slim in special forces because there's just not a lot of positions.
Right.
I would say maybe like 1%.
Yeah, it's a significant achievement.
I may be wrong. Somebody might call me out. Maybe somewhere between.
No matter what we say, there'll be people out there that call us out on stuff.
It's just sure. It's hard because there's just not a lot. We're so specialized. There's not a lot of slots.
Right.
So,
all right. So, kind of characteristic humility of folks that have done your stuff, but obviously a very tough guy, a very experienced guy, an extraordinary leader, a tremendous manager, just really a background that deserves tremendous respect. And I think it's hard for people who haven't been in the military to fully appreciate, as you talk through it in a fairly casual way, what all that means.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, you grew up in Florida. You spent a lot of your career in Florida. You're back in Florida now. We wouldn't find Sean Hurd if we did the proverbial Florida man Google search, would we?
No, I'm not. Fortunately, I stay away from the news and the law, which that gets you the Florida man title.
No case of beer, then go wrestle a gator.
Yeah, or like I don't know if you've ever been to that website, but it's hilarious, man.
Right.
Yeah, you see some crazy. It's just because, like, I tell people, I'm like, we get, like, Shift Group, for example, is a Boston-based company, and most of the people that work with me are Northeasterns. And up there, you have, like, history and community, and, hey, my dad lives down the road, and, like, Florida's just, like, a bunch of transplants. So like and the weather is always nice. So people are always doing crazy stuff all year around.
The culture is definitely different.
Yeah.
All three of my boys served in the military as well, and my
Yeah.
middle son was an infantry platoon leader, and a couple guys in his platoon heard, "Oh, you're from Massachusetts. What do you guys eat up there?"
Yeah. Not grits, right?
Yeah,
Grits.
completely different world. All right,
Yeah.
so you wrapped up a 22-year career, 8 deployments, amazing credentials, and you went into sales. You went into sales with a company selling to governments and military, and that's pretty common. That's not an unusual path. Obviously, you could have gone into contracting, you could have gone into the defense industrial complex, but you pulled the ripcord. You jumped into sales. I mean, it can be a brutal and completely foreign environment to what you were doing. What drove that? What were you thinking, and why did you select that for your transition?
So actually, Ed, I went into my first 8 months in sales was in service as a software tech sales as a
Okay.
sales development rep before I went to Veoneer and started selling back to the government. But the reason there's two things that led me to sales, and the first one was I looked across my relationships, both military and civilian, more civilian than military. And I said, hey, who out there is successful? And guys I went to high school with or played baseball, all that. And it was like the guys that were like multimillionaires right now that I'm still friends with had some sort of like sales background.
Mm-hmm.
So first I'm like, okay, that seems, that kind of validates that there's money in that industry. But the real reason I went was because I actually didn't want to do project management. And I don't know if you know this or not, but the military transition complex, I guess, if you want to call it that, a bunch of volunteers and nonprofits and stuff, they push senior non-commissioned officers into, I don't know if this always been this way, but it seems like lately they want you to go get your PMP and go be a project manager for a Fortune 500 company or something like that, right? And the pay is pretty good. It's like 6 figures, but something unique about being at US SOCOM when you retire is like it's a 4-star headquarters. Everybody there is senior, so it's like a retirement home. So you get to see a lot of people transition. So like the 3 years I was there, I would see like these sergeant majors getting out, and they would come talk to me like, "Hey, I just got a job at Amazon or Google as a project manager, making 140,000 base. I'm excited, blah blah blah." And then I watch them on LinkedIn, and they would all quit within like the first 4 months.
Wow.
And they were like super excited about their. So I call them like, "Hey, what happened, man? Did you get fired? Say something crazy?" And they're like, "Nah, man, it's just like it wasn't what I wanted to do, right?" And I'm like, "Well, explain that to me." And they were like, "Well, number one, these organizations are similar to the military. They're big bureaucracies. You have mandatory training. You're just another, part of the cog in the wheel, blah blah blah." But second, what I think really bothered them was there was 2 things. The first one was once they found out they were hard chargers and they got stuff done, they would like pile work on them, and then they would see somebody making the same money next to them with like half the workload, right? And then the second one was like they didn't really do career discovery or this discovery after they got out, and they a lot of them like they weren't their true selves when they went to these companies. They just they wanted to go get a job, and like the culture of the company and the people around them just didn't like bring them what they needed, because they compare it, and you probably know this from being a vet, you compare it to your environment that you had for the past 20 years in the military.
You assume you're going to have the same accountability, the same work ethic, the same determination, the same grit, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and just the way you communicate with people.
Fairly direct.
All that type of stuff isn't welcome in some of those environments. So a lot of them quit. And I was like, well, sales, the harder you work, the better you get at it. it's like directly correlates to the amount of money you make. So
Right.
like, they can't pile work on you. If you're like working, you work double the amount of time, you're supposed to make double amount of money, right?
Right.
So I thought it was a good thing to go chase. And then we could talk about it later, but I found out a bunch of other things why I think it's a good career for vets too. But that was post my transition.
Yeah, we'll get more into that, but
Yeah.
real quick to help us kind of transition to the next part of this conversation, what would you say now in retrospect you've learned are the most important attributes that you brought? And I'll say specifically from special operations of the Army, although you might want to answer more broadly military, that really supports you in sales.
So there's the main one, and I know people because this is an abstract term, but the main one is just like in sales, there's just a lot of loss and negativity and no, right? Like, so you get, if you can't deal with that, if you don't have like I guess the word's grit, like you're not going to make it, right? So like I'm hard headed and I got grit and I'm determined, and I brought that from my special operations background. So, and then number two, it's especially like in being a special forces guys is like, it would like building relationships was like a really big part of my job.
Mhm.
Right. And so I could take that, my relationship building. So what I would say in an interview is I didn't learn this until a while, and that's all part of the story. But I would say, hey, I'm a special forces sergeant major. I used to travel around the world and link up with like foreign partner forces and dignitaries and leaders, and sometimes the U.S. State Department and senior foreign leaders. And it was my job to sell them on X, Y, and Z, in order to achieve U.S. foreign policy objectives, right? And sometimes X, Y, and Z would put those partners like family at risk, put their lives at risk, put their country's like reputation at risk. Or if it's for the United States, like the ambassador, we could put their job at risk. A lot of high stakes situations. So if I can do that, if I can sell that, I can sell anything.
Yeah,
right.
that's more important than selling $1 million ERP software package.
But once I started kind of doing that, like, and explaining it that way, I was like starting to, because I had a hard transition. But once I started explaining it that way, I started getting farther in the interview stuff.
So quickly take us through the sales jobs you had, and we'll talk about shift group later.
Yeah. So like I said, I transitioned into a sales development rep for a service as a software. So the guy and the girl in the company, entry level, lowest paying sales role there is, and it's your job to use cold calling, emailing, and social selling to book meetings or create business in order for an account executive. That's their model to take the meeting and move the deal down the road.
Right.
So essentially, it's your job to book meetings and create. Some people see it as a marketing function too. You're like creating interest. You're figuring out what the market's telling you with your booking meetings, right? So I did that for 8 months, and it was very valuable to me because I learned how to build my own pipeline, right?
Were you hitting quota?
Oh yeah, I was like the top rep at my company. The first month I was there out of 60.
Wow.
And that was just out of pure, I just outworked everybody, to be honest with you. Two things. I looked at what the top guy was doing and I copied him for a while, outworked everybody, and then started like adapting to my personality. But yeah, like I said, I wouldn't have changed it for the world and make a lot of money, but I learned how to build my own pipeline, which, coming from a manufacturing background, the other industries don't have sales development reps. Most people are just, there is a sales rep.
And most of the sales reps aren't doing business development either.
Yeah. But, so like when I went to my next job, Ban Air, which is like a British manufacturing company that sold back to the U.S. Department of Defense, I took that like ability to book meetings, but do like a new school kind of way, and brought it to that industry, which nobody was doing. And, my ability to create relationships as like a prior sergeant major that was in the Army, and I was selling the Army, and I did pretty well. Did 7 figures my first year or whatnot. But yeah, and then from there, I did that for a while, and then that's when JR asked me to come on and help him build shift group.
All right. So you talked about the toughness and the grit and just expecting that stuff is going to go wrong and it's going to be a shit show, and that's okay. You're going to figure out your way through it. I think a lot about the expression, you've probably heard it, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So people frame how bad the situation is based on their experience. And if the worst thing that's ever happened is somebody told you no when you cold called them once, you're going to react differently than if the worst thing that's ever happened is life and death kind of stuff that you've dealt with. So being in sales, a lot of bad stuff happens, as it does in the military. Does that expression resonate with you? Do you find that is perhaps part of the core of why vets can succeed in sales?
Yeah, for that's a big thing. It's like, nothing. Like, I have the confidence to wake up every day and go, try to get to a no. That's my mindset. But I would say, like, the one thing that I do have problems with is, and I think this is, a function of my military service, is like, I had a hard time, like, untying myself from the outcomes, right? So, like, in the military, you do it. It seems like we always win. Like, I mean, we fail and we learn, and we fail and we learn, but we eventually, like, win, right?
Well, it's beat into you. You're going to accomplish the mission. That's what matters.
But, like, in business, in sales, sometimes you just don't win,
right?
Or, like, you don't make your client happy no matter what, right? So, like, and so that's what I've been working on lately, is just not, like, tying myself to outcomes, just focusing on what I can do properly, right?
All right. And so in what you're doing now, you're the veteran advocate, you're the voice of Shift Group's veterans programs, but tell us about Shift Group.
Yeah. So I'll tell you how it's actually kind of cool. So JR was placing, well, he had a very successful tech sales career.
So JR is the president of Shift Group.
Yeah, right? He's the CEO of Shift Group. He went from, like, BDR to, like, CRO across, like, a 15-year span. He also was a VP of sales at a company that he went from BDR to VP of sales of, that did a $2.5 billion exit. And he was the VP of sales at the time. So he did the tech dream exit, right, with all the stocks and stuff that everybody dreams of. That's why everybody gets it. So he's been down that road. Well, like, his key to his success was always, like, hiring the right people, right? So he leaned hard on his, like, athletic background. He was a Division I hockey player for Holy Cross. His brother was in the National Hockey League and Olympics, and he's just surrounded by the Northeastern, like, sports type, but elite, like Division I and pro. So he through his sales career, he was recruiting these athletes, and he would hire vets. He told me, and they would always do the vet. Like, he'd always have the best. So he said, even knowing, he thought he was a good hiring manager, essentially, and he still had 50% fail, bad hire rate. So he envisioned, like, creating Shift Group to help athletes, both college and pro, get, into these sales jobs, because he thinks, like, it de-risks, or he doesn't think, he knows it de-risks, like, the hiring, right? So he did that for about, I think it was almost a year and a half, 2 years. But in the back of his mind, he knew he always, like, the vets was going to be the next like, vertical of the company. And he just wanted to make sure, like, he had everything in place and the athletes were going good. They did like over a couple $1 million in revenue his first 2 years. And then he said, "Hey, Sean, I've been following you on LinkedIn." So that's the power of, like being on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you guys are both very active on LinkedIn.
Yeah, he was like, "Hey, you're on LinkedIn. I saw you. You'd be the perfect guy to come in here." And, like, he actually just wanted to pay me just some cash to help him, like, do an intro course for vets, explain the whole vet thing to him. I don't know if he ever planned on hiring me full time, but maybe that was his plan. but I just like got in there and forced my way into the best way by just like trying to work really hard and have results, which I did. So eventually he brought me on full time. We got the vet thing stood up, and then I went back to kind of what I do best, which is like I still deal with all the vets and I help like partnerships and stuff, but like my main job is like to create demand for Shift Group for with partner companies.
So you also run training for BDRs, I think.
Yeah. So what we do is like we partner with athletic organizations, professional, players associations, colleges, special ops groups, Army transition groups, and we have a big LinkedIn presence. And between all that, we bring in these candidates. It's free. It doesn't cost them a dime. And they come in and we give them about 30 hours of high level sales training that will make them like, it's not like it's not like a 4-year degree or anything, but it's good enough to where they can go into their company, their tech company right now is what we're focused on, and they're going to be successful in their first quarter, right?
But it's pretty rigorous training. What's the washout rate?
80%, but
Only 20% are making it through.
but it's not because it's hard ed. It's because we do a career exploration, and people think they want to be in sales
Because they saw their buddy making $1 million that they knew from high school, just like you.
And it's like the people on LinkedIn, oh, it's remote, you can work whenever you want,
Right.
and work-life balance. But they think they want to get in sales, and they come in, and then we do a pretty good job, that first portion of the course, of showing them what it's really like to be in sales.
Right.
And most of them are like, I don't want to do that, right? And then they just drop out, right? So like, it's not like hard or undoable. It's just, and that's our value prop. When people hire from us, they know that I don't know, you're a sales leader. I don't know how many people you hired that thought they wanted to do sales, and then within the first quarter they just quit, right? So that'll happen with our people because they went through and they understand what they're getting themselves into. But we do the 30 hours of training. They have a one-on-one coach. It's free for them. And at the end, last year we launched a software called Shift Connect, where hiring partners pay us a subscription, and they go on to Shift Connect, and all our candidates are on there with this interactive portal that like shows them doing live cold calls, emails, and a 30, 60, 90, why me, like all these videos and stuff. And you can search it by like geo and time zone and like when their start date is. And we got about 500 on there right now of athletes and vets. And it makes like the hiring process like super easy. Like if you're a sales leader at night, you go in there and you favorite 10 people, and we set up all the interviews and stuff like that.
So you've got two business models, if I understand correctly. One is you help outsource candidates, and that can be one on or one off, or it can be the subscription model, but basically you help place people. And the other is you actually run an outsourced business development program as well, don't you?
Yeah. So like this is kind of interesting. We don't talk about it a lot because it's a special situation where we do this for other companies, but we'll talk to a company and we'll say, hey, let us help you hire entry level sales reps. And they're like, number one, you're like, hey, we don't have the budget for that, or we're not ready for that, or whatever the reason is. And we'll say, hey, how are you currently doing creating demand and doing, booking meetings and for your salespeople and like getting revenue in the door? And a lot of them won't, they're not. Right. So like, I'm like, well, how about this? And this is how it all came about, where at first during last year, JR omitted too, is like everybody, because of the economy, like the hiring almost went to a halt for a couple months, and we had an excess of candidates. And I was like, hey, I got all these people sitting around not doing anything. How about I go buy a bunch of tech that I know how to use from being a prior BDR manager? And I had them start doing cold outbound for Shift Group, right? And it was immediate success. Like I went and found like 10 athletes and vets, trained them up, and then we just had meetings coming in like the first week, right?
Wow.
And then we're like, wow, this is kind of powerful. I'm sure like some companies could use this, you know, service, and we kind of sell it as like a stopgap, right? Like what we want to do is like, hey, you can't hire BDRs right now. We'll come in, we'll do it for you. And then if
Right.
we have success, then you can hire that person at the end. And then our main goal of placing a vet or an athlete
Right.
is met, right? And then what I like to do, the best case scenario, is create a conveyor belt where like one person's doing outsource for them, they hire somebody, that person gets promoted, they go in, and it's just like a constant flow for people into their organization. But we're early in the stages, but that's my overall vision of like a desired future state is we just have like a conveyor belt of sales reps into your bench, right?
Got
And
it.
you're just building from it. And then JR is going. We're gonna start expanding into other industries pretty soon, like manufacturing, financial
Yeah,
services.
certainly SaaS is really saturated with
Yeah,
BDRs and business
yeah,
development and all of that. I think manufacturing is an area that's rife with opportunity. So when you're talking to a veteran, obviously your training program helps them get up to speed, helps them determine if it's a good fit, helps you filter out people that aren't going to be a good fit. But what attributes do you look for? Is it any vet, or are there certain personal characteristics or skills that you look for, even among veterans, to try to determine who's going to be most successful?
yeah. So we'll take any vet. Like we don't discriminate. We'll give everybody a shot. But because JR comes from the sports background, we actually do have a lot of athlete employees. We're real big on like scoreboards and like evaluating people, right? So like they they get a grade at the end of their training. Like like a tier one candidate, a tier two, and they actually know where they stand and why, right? So like our best candidate, our tier ones are one, they're people that like the biggest thing we look for to rate them as a tier one is their ability to be coachable. That's like a really big one, right? So take what they were taught and implement it quickly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then take the feedback, and then it's just the loop. And like so, coachability is the main one, and then the second one obviously is the grid that I talked about, and then there has to be some sort of like intelligence there.
Sure.
And but you know, if they have the grit, the coachability, like they're gonna succeed as an like especially like with our backgrounds.
Right.
They're highly successful.
What sales training did you get along the way?
Nothing. I just the hard knocks.
So you say you looked at who the top performer was, you figured out what they were doing, you copied them, you worked your ass off, and
Yeah.
and so you never got trained in a sales process or a sales methodology or anything like that.
No, I think going from Green Beret to sales, I think a lot of stuff you learn as a Green Beret is essentially like sales.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of it's sales,
Right.
right? So like you just gotta learn like we did qualification, when we're going into like an area to link up with a partner force, like we had qualification material. I didn't know that's what it was called.
Right.
But like, hey, we need to find a force that has a leader that does X, Y, and
Yeah, you
Z.
described your ideal client.
Yeah, so like we were doing all that, we just didn't know. I didn't know that was what was happening out here. But
Right.
no, I didn't have anything. So like that's when another reason why I joined Shift Group too is like JR teaches me a lot, right? Because he's a big enterprise seller of like big enterprise deals. So he's real big on like discovery and deal frameworks and medic and all that force management. Is we actually give all our students they get a free access to force management training on discovery and stuff. So real big medic shop.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, in my experience, we've kind of touched on this with grit. Much of sales success is really about discipline. And certainly
Yeah.
coming from the military, that's embedded. But tell me about your typical daily and weekly workflow. Are you starting with PT every morning and keeping yourself fit and then jumping into emails, or how does it work?
That's actually a good question. So I my last year in the military, I lost so my hobby, like because I didn't live in Florida, I lived in Kentucky, Tennessee. So my hobby was ultra marathon running, right? So I like ran. That's what I did. Long distances. And I wasn't like a superior athlete or anything, but I finished races
Just
and
mental toughness.
yeah. So I when I was down here, I like lost feeling in my left leg.
Wow.
And and so I ended up having like a back surgery. Not a like they have these like this new back surgery out there where they do 8 little tiny micro holes and they put you on with a laser. Well, like after that, and here's something kind of crazy too is like the back surgery, not having but people that you're accountable to, you know, I just stopped like working out for a while. And I gained like 30. I'm not super overweight, but I gained like 30 pounds. My energy was low. I wasn't sleeping as good. So recently, like I was just like, hey, I gotta get the PT going again. And so I signed up for a 50K, and I've been training for that ultra marathon. And ever since I've been doing that, like I feel like I got more energy and I'm being more productive during the day. So yeah, right now I wake up and I go do my runs. And then I start off. I found that like putting stuff in blocks is the best way to operate in sales. I don't know if you do that, but I have like admin block, prospecting block, um, you know, uh, meeting blocks. So I put everything in the blocks, and then I leave some time for stuff like this. But yeah, and that's it. My typical day is like wake up, do PT, do admin, do a bunch of sales tasks and blocks.
And when
And
you jumped in as a BDR, how many hours a day were you working?
15.
15 hours a day. So when you
Yeah.
say you outworked all your colleagues and made you the top performing rep, you didn't just make an extra dial. You worked twice as much as the rest of them were.
I would say, yeah. So like you're gonna think I'm a maniac, but so I'm married. At the time I was 39 or 40, married. I had twin daughters, or like at the time they were 8. And my wife works, she's an accountant, but I was just like, hey, for the next 3 months, it's not gonna be good. And she's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm not like
You just consider me deployed. You're not going to see me.
no, I was just like, I need to make account executive and like be a closer. Like I can't. There's no money as a BD. Like the best way to I got to start at the beginning, and I need to get to where I want to be as quick as possible. In my mind, it was just like outwork everybody, right? So yeah, I put in like 15 hours a day, and it was funny because certain states and certain job, I don't know, employment law, were like considered hourly employees, even though I was on a salary. It was really low. I actually made more in retirement and disability than I did in that job.
Right.
But they were like, hey, you can't work past 8 hours a day. So I just shut the clock off, right?
Right.
And just keep going. Because we still got commission on meeting stuff, right? And I was making probably like 500 to 750 calls a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was crazy. Yeah, it was crazy.
And I assume you tracked all your metrics, connect rate, all that kind of stuff. You knew
Yeah, I
exactly
had
what your
my
numbers were.
first month. It was for a major SaaS company. We had about 60 SDRs, and I think I booked or I held 64 meetings that first month, and with like I don't know you. I can't remember how many I booked, but I think my like show rate was like in the high 60s,
Wow.
like 68%. I think I've read a couple articles like anything like 70% or above is like really good, but like 50 is like the standard. I don't know what it is.
But even the fact that you knew your numbers is a
Yeah,
perfect example of the difference between the SaaS world and the industrial world. If I
yeah,
were to ask an industrial sales rep, almost without exception, how many calls they make, what their connect rate is, what their meeting show rate is, how many meetings they've booked, none of them would know.
and that's what like even here at Shift Group, I'm like building this out with JR's help and another coworker, Anthony, is we can get to the point, and I've seen this in really high functioning SaaS companies where you can say, hey, if I make 750 dials, I'm most likely going to book, 3 meetings off of that. And if I do that for like 5 days, I'm going to have 15 meetings, and out of those 15 meetings, if 69% show up, how much is a meeting, or I mean, how much is a deal worth? And you do the math and you say, hey, we got to make this, you can reverse engineer it back to, hey, we got to make this many dials to hit quota.
Exactly. Sales math. And if the numbers aren't working, you need more people, or you need to get better at your connect, and you need to get better at your close. You need to get better at each step along the way.
Yeah.
I talk about it like it's a manufacturing system, just like a factory. Stuff comes in one end, flows through, and comes out the other end. And if you've got a step in the middle that's inefficient, it screws the whole line up. Well, it's the same. If you've got a step somewhere in the middle of your revenue growth that isn't efficient, you got to fix that, because that is killing your rate of the kind of the net output at the end.
And if you can get it, like, and that's another thing, if you get, you can tell if you've been doing it and you track it properly, if it's a rep problem, if it's a list problem, if it's a tool problem, if I can, like, when we go help companies do outbound, I can tell them if they have like product market fit or not. Right. Like, and it's so like, yeah, that is something that I did realize when we were in manufacturing sales, because it's more like long going to conferences and traveling. And it's just like, people are just kind of good with like closing big deals. You close a couple big deals and you're good to go.
But a lot of that is culture. I mean, people say, well, in the industrial space, we have a long sales cycle. We can only meet face to face, and that's horseshit. Of course, there is a certain part of business that happens that way, but there's no reason that you can't get on the phone and use email and use social media and connect with people on LinkedIn and call them up, as long as you're delivering value. If you're just calling and saying, hey, I make a machine that does such and such, have you thought about that? Well, of course, that's not going to work.
So I prospected at Banner. I prospected into the 2-star headquarters, which like there's no data, right? So I, like, most people will be like, oh, you can't talk, right? I closed right before I left, a couple months before I left, I closed a $1.2 million deal with a 3-star headquarters, and it came from LinkedIn.
Wow.
And it not me prospecting. Well, kind of. It's a method that I use called social selling, but I built value enough for a guy on LinkedIn that I had never met him, never talked to him, came to me and said, hey man, I've been watching you. You guys do this. We need to solve this problem.
Right.
And on LinkedIn. Wow. So like, and then most people be like, oh, like LinkedIn doesn't work for manufacturing. I mean, the U.S. Army colonel reached out to me on LinkedIn. There's not a lot of military active on LinkedIn, so obviously it works. I know it works if you do it right.
So let's step back from the veterans question and just talk based on your experience being a BDR, running BDRs, training BDRs, managing and coaching BDRs. What do you think are the most important metrics to track to give you the insight to most effectively coach a BDR?
So the metrics to track to be able to coach them?
Yep.
So I think, like, well, for a BDR specifically, right, since it's your job to like essentially reach out to people, like I focus on the effectiveness of their outreach, right? And so and to me, it just, and some people don't agree with me, but I think, like, and people reference this number. I don't even know if it's true, but I just see it everywhere, that like 3 to 5% of your market's like buying like right now.
Right.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I've seen Gartner studies on it. But like, in order to find those people, like, it's you got to do activity, right? Like, so you got to talk to a certain amount of people to find that 3 to 5%. So like a big thing I focus on, number one is like activity, right? And number two is like quality of outreach, right?
So by activity, you mean number of calls, number of emails, number of social engagements?
Yeah. And then like some people are like, hey, those days are over. And I'm like, no, like at 3-5% buy-in, you have to find them. Like, you can't just like it and then you got to find them, right? So like the way to find them is through having conversations. The way you have a conversation is just through activity, right? But one thing I like to tell people though is like, it's not a one-prong approach to social selling, and emailing are also effective ways, right? And the really good SDRs, do it all at the same time, right? These kids that have like 4 screens and they got a bunch of tech and their day is just filled with like very efficient like activity, I call it, right? With quality outreach.
So speaking of people saying that it's dead, different, direct outbound sales is dead, or direct mail is dead, or email doesn't work anymore, or any of that. I saw a LinkedIn post last week, and I'm going to just read a part of it, and then I want your reaction to it. So it said, I think we're seeing the end of inbound sales development, the SDR role for SaaS companies. I just don't think buyers want this outreach. As a result, the inbound sales game has permanently changed. The new play is to just be available when buyers want to talk. Buyers get pretty far on their own by doing their own research, testing free or trial versions of self-serve software, and leveraging the help docs. AI chatbots and self-guided training also help. So what's your reaction to that?
First of all, my CEO responded to that post. I know exactly
Okay,
which
so you,
one.
you saw it. Yeah,
Yeah,
he reacted pretty strongly to it.
he's like, "Oh, you're just gonna sit around waiting on." But so like here's the thing with that is, number one, there's like very few companies in any space that has went to market, IPO'd or got acquired, and there's some, but it's not a lot that just did a product. Essentially, that guy's describing a product-led growth
Right.
motion, which is like you just sit back and take orders and you mark, right? There's very, I don't think like, I think like when you take an investment, or even if you don't take an investment, you only have a certain amount of capital and you have a certain time to build a sustainable revenue model, or you're going to be out of business, right? So like, I don't know. I guess I think maybe that's the reason why that play is not necessarily the only thing you could do, is because I don't think you can just sit around and wait and burn revenue, right?
All
You
right, so
gotta,
let's come at it from the other
yeah,
angle. A lot of the
yeah,
companies that are people that are listening to this are with companies who
yeah,
have never done that kind of, they've never had a sophisticated BDR, SDR sort of an
yeah,
outreach. They've got a very traditional sales process. They go to trade shows, they generate some leads, they wait for existing customers that typically drive 50 to 70% of the business to request quotes. Every once in a while, they come across another project, they do an engineering study and they send a quote, and then they kind of hope that it's going to work. And so the challenge for those companies is their business model feels like it works for them. They've been in business for 50 years or 70 years. They may not be growing quickly. They may not have a lot of security and vitality. The business may be kind of stagnating a bit, but they don't necessarily think that's a problem. In fact, many of them don't want rapid growth. They don't want the hockey stick kind of growth that a
yeah.
software company looks for. So they use that to excuse their sales reps for not doing it. How do you react to that?
I just think like, I mean, if we go back to that study, like there's 3 to 5% buying in your market, and if you're not reaching out to them, somebody else is reaching out to them, you're going to miss that opportunity,
Right.
right? So that, I mean, I think that's like a simple way to explain it. But I would say like I can use Shift Group as a case study. When I showed up to Shift Group, we they were doing mass emails out of HubSpot with like no results. And I went and found an expert in the industry. He's actually a young kid. Brought him in. He showed us how to like set up everything. Like there's a bunch of settings, and we focused on deliverability, like getting into inboxes.
Right.
Um, in 1 month, we went from having 3 4 months in a row with like before I showed up with no email meetings to steady 6 to 8 meetings a week from one email campaign,
Wow.
by just bringing in a young kid that knew how, number one, he knows how to get in the inboxes without getting spam,
Right.
and number two, he's really good at copy, which is like way opposite of what like like I was in manufacturing too, long emails, like
Right.
just like he came in over like very short emails that you would look at and be like he booked. We have a client that sells an IT solution to Fortune 500 companies only, and he booked a meeting of the first day
Wow.
with like a 4 sentence email.
Wow.
with the CIO of a Fortune 5. And I'm looking at the email. I'm like, why did she answer that, man? So yeah, I think like it's not dead. But I just don't rest on that. I also like we cold call, right? And between like us cold calling with our fellowship that I run, and our email campaign, and then me and JR and the team, you see how we operate on LinkedIn. We bring a lot of meetings in through the social too, right? So like we're running all three of those plays, and in a bad economy in an industry where you think would be underwater, we're having our best like growth ever. Right. So yeah, I don't think it's dead by any means. I think people are just not like they just don't want to change, or they're comfortable. A lot of these younger people are just comfortable, like they thought they were just gonna send emails for a living, right? They don't want to call people and stuff. So
All right, so let's talk about comfort. In
yeah.
the space that people listen to this, many of them, the typical sales rep is probably 40, 50, even 60 years old. They've got a lot of habits that they've built over the years, and early on, those habits may have served them well. They may have been successful. To some extent, they may have gotten a little bit fat, dumb, and happy, but the markets have changed. The way you sell has changed. Do you think a 50-year-old rep can really learn to sell effectively and do business development in today's markets?
If they purposely like make an effort to say, "Hey, I'm gonna have a beginner's mindset,"
Right.
like, that's what I had to do. I mean, think about it. I was like a special forces E9 with a master's degree. I speak Russian. I led 600 people. I did all this stuff, and I went into an industry with like 21-year-olds.
Right.
And like, if I went in there as like try to life experience these people. Like I learned from them. I learned from like 21-year-olds because they mastered this tech, right? And so you got to have a beginner's mindset. And the second thing is like even let's go back to email for example. Like people our age, we write long emails, and what the way that this even the people that are they're selling to, even if they're 60, they still only read the
Right.
subject line and like the preview, right? So like the young kids understand that because they're like, hey, when a person looks at my email on an iPhone, this is what it looks like. I have to optimize my message to that quick snapshot.
Mhm.
If older people aren't doing that, that's why it's not they're not being successful because they're not like that. I mean, their prospects had Microsoft Office and Gmail just like everybody else.
Right.
Like this, no, I mean, they still have the same email system. So
All right, so you're talking about some interesting kind of
yeah,
tactical and granular stuff, and that leads me to sales enablement. Sales enablement is something in the industrial space that doesn't. A lot of companies don't even talk about it. They don't know what it is. I would assume that you have a fair amount of experience with it, and there's a lot of discussion about how sales enablement tools and content and resources and training can help reps. What do you recommend for companies?
I'll steal this from the company I follow. I don't know where they got it from, if they invented it or not, but they say Apex revenue. They do outbound as a service, but they say the list is the strategy, right? So, like I said, I think the number one thing like a good sales enablement shop can do is figure out a list that has the proper data that allows reps to have the most conversations in a day, right? So that is important, and the tools that are out there that allow you to conduct the outreach. So like an email sequencing tool, and a phone some sort of a power dialer or some
Mhm.
sort of phone tool. And then if it's expensive, but if you're really in the coaching and getting better, some sort of like intelligence tool that like records like everything you do, and optimizes like your daily movements and like how much you talk, and like a gong, for
Right.
example, right? So like there's gong is the major one. There's a bunch of them out there. And the new hotness is um intent data. Like, so like I don't know how well that works in manufacturing, but in some industries, people are swear by it. Some they say it doesn't work. So that's the major tools that we're looking at right now.
Got it.
Yeah.
One of the things that drives me most nuts about sales these days, particularly with the sales reps in these industrial companies, is lack of accountability. But I see the lack of accountability in management as well. And so it just fosters this culture of lack of accountability. Obviously, Ranger Regiment is probably one of the most hyper accountable places in the world. And you talked about how you had to learn to kind of temper some of your expectations of others because the communication, the expectations created some conflict. How do you encourage accountability, and what happens if somebody just keeps disappointing in that way?
So like, it's so what I learned in the past like year that if you really want to keep accountability of sales reps, accountability is the CRM, right? Your Salesforce and your HubSpot or whatever you're using,
Right.
because I continue to see it. The best reps follow the companies, and that's what's another good thing about a military person is we're good at falling into systems, right? And being accountable to that system. But like the CROs that say, and JR says this all the time, is like your base pay is your admin, right? And then your sales is your commission. But like the accountability is doing like all that stuff in your CRM, setting up tasks, following up like when you're supposed to, and being able to like explain that to your sales leader, how you're projecting, all that stuff is so like I guess what I'm saying is like the CRM is a good way to keep people accountable in sales, and the best salespeople I know are like use their CRM to their advantage.
The best salespeople value CRM. The
Yeah,
sales reps that complain about CRM are the mediocre ones, in my experience.
yeah, those are the guys and girls that are like, oh, the top's just trying to track me.
Right.
Um, but I'll go back to my first BDRs. Like once I started booking meetings at a high rate, they didn't care how many calls I made a day. Never
Sure.
asked me, right? So like, if you don't want to get tracked, then perform at a high level. Nobody cares, right? But if you're getting tracked, it's probably because you're not performing, and the reason you're not performing is probably because you're not doing the basics properly, which is like using your CRM to its advantage. But I would say like that's one thing that I've seen across all civilian jobs. It's not sales. Is leaders don't have like a counseling system like
Hmm.
we did in the military, where you're pulling people in,
Right.
you're rating them. Hey, you're number 5 out of 8. Number one is number one because of this.
Right.
You're number 5 because of this. If you want to be number one, you need to do this, this, and this. And by the way, here's the plan to get there by next quarter. If you do all this stuff, you have a good chance of being number one, right? Nobody does that out here. And they don't, and then what I see too is like they don't like having hard conversations with people because a lot of people are like afraid of like confrontation, right? So like you got to have, as a leader, you got to have those hard conversations. You can still have empathy and respect
Of
and
course.
have a hard conversation, right? But that's in sales, and you know this, when they start promoting people off of sales performance, not leadership ability. And that's another thing the military does differently that I missed is like they promote off of like not off like your performance, but your potential to do the next job. Just because you're like you're the best sales rep doesn't mean you're gonna be the best leader,
Right.
right? So you might just be a person nobody likes, but you're just a good sales rep, right? But nobody's gonna work for you. So yeah, I would say like that is something that I would like to, as I keep moving up in this career and I get more responsibilities, bring that leadership, counseling, like stuff that we did in the military into the organizations that I'm into.
Yeah, I think a sales manager is as close a role to a squad leader as you can have. I mean, the counseling, the coaching, the training, the accountability, the tough love, the genuine caring, all those kinds of things. I think that's the closest analogy. And sales manager, I believe, is the most important role in many organizations to actually hit the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's so sad to watch like a BDR that's not doing well not know that they're not doing well,
Right.
and they just get called in a meeting and laid off.
So to
And
that point,
they're like, what just happened?
right.
They're like, you should have known you're not. Yeah, it's like they never told them.
Yeah,
Right?
complete abdication of responsibility. There's no leadership in that case. You mentioned earlier stack ranking. You're the number 5 out of 8 or whatever. So let's talk about a military term, span of control. The military believes span of control, maximum effective span of control. I mean, at least it used to be they'd say 4 or 5 people. I don't know what the current doctrine is, but how many people can you effectively manage? What would you say for a sales manager? What's the real effective maximum span of control?
4 people. I mean, think about. I mean, the military does it like a platoon sergeant has 4 squads, right?
Right.
And a fire team leader has 3 people, a squad leader has 2, right? So like 4 people, and that's another thing too is like, you don't see any of that, and you'll see like a VP of sales have like 40 AEs underneath them, and there's no next level of like.
There's no way they're coaching enough.
No, not at all.
They can't be.
Not at all. Right. So yeah, I would say 4 people is like in any business, like military, civilian, doesn't matter, sales, whatever, like 4 people is about all you can. And then you got to have like that force multiplying, like you want
systems and processes and all that
yeah,
kind of stuff.
you got 4 people, you hold them accountable, they hold another 4 people accountable, and next thing you know, everybody's holding everybody accountable. But you can't if you got like 100 people and you're trying to hold them all accountable. I can't even imagine that.
Right.
But it's every person for themselves after that.
So how do you learn the most when you're keeping up with sales trends and what's effective and what's not? Do you read? Do you watch video, audio? Is it social media feeds? What works best for you?
So I follow this guy. You gotta look him up. He has some really good videos. His name's Troy Barter.
Okay.
And he ran the SDR org when I first met him for a DocuScience competitor at the time. They were called PandaDoc. The best way to learn, and I tell all my reps this, is to do and fail and learn and then change, right? So like that's the big difference. How I was able to win SDR of the month, my first month, when I was on a ramp quota, and like I was only supposed to book like 14 meetings, right? All these other people were like, oh, I need to watch videos and read and listen to calls, and I need to do this, and I'm not ready. And like, there are all these reasons why they're not ready. And I'm like, stop. When I was getting onboarded, I'm like, you're wasting my time,
right.
Man. Like, I gotta make, and so I just started calling and failing and learning and getting better. That's the best way I learn.
So you watch videos from that guy. He's got a YouTube channel.
He's on LinkedIn. He's got but I think he has a YouTube channel too. But like, I show every one of my reps this 5 minutes. One of the first videos he made, where it's just like, he's like, hey, I wanted to start this YouTube channel, so I went and bought this like light, and I bought this thing, and I had to get a logo. And he's like, but I already have a window. And like, it's a pretty good video, but he's just like, hey, the best way to learn how to cold call is to cold call.
Right.
And so that's the gist of it. But I actually believe that. Now, I mean, obviously, I think I learned the majority of my information I need for my industry on LinkedIn. And then I'll see something, and then I'll go research it and try it, right? So like, and then see if it works or not. So
Sure.
A lot of like testing, and we do that with our outbound, right? That's a culture thing that SaaS has that I think is really good. Is like we do a lot of A/B testing of everything. So like, we'll send 2 separate emails and track the numbers, like you said. And if this one's working and that one's not working, we double down on the one that's working. Or like, we do 2 cold call openers, and that one doesn't work, but this one works. We know which one works. And I'm like, hey man, that one works for you. You need to double down on that.
Right.
So like, yeah.
Have you ever heard Keenan's, have you read the book Gap Selling or heard Keenan's Gap Selling podcast?
Yeah. He's actually on my CEO's podcast. We just haven't released it yet. But yeah, I'm a big follower of Keenan, and I actually texted him, or I DM'd him in LinkedIn, because gap selling is a lot like military planning, right? So you take your like current state, and you're like trying to figure out
Right.
what the entire future state is, and then, your task or what's blocking you from getting there. That's gap filling, right? I was like, hey, did you steal this from us? But yeah, I actually believe in that. So you got, essentially like, you got to figure out, what their desired future state is and what their current state is, and then how your problem propels them into, that state.
Now, one of the things I like about it is to have industrial sales reps and industrial sales managers and industrial presidents and CEOs listen to it, because as he takes a sales rep through it, you can tell, I mean, his goal is to help them succeed. He's got a genuine and caring, his intent is to make them successful. On the other hand, he pulls no punches, and some of those calls are pretty brutal, particularly for people with fragile egos and self-esteem issues. And the idea that you can have somebody who claims to be a sales expert selling $1 million capital equipment who would not be able to answer those questions in an endure or coaching session like that, I think speaks to the weakness of many sales teams.
So even in manufacturing, Ed, like when I did that big deal I told you about, I sold a shelter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a maintenance shelter for vehicles. And I think like what got us over the top, I didn't go in there and say, hey, look at our shelter and how cool it is. And it has like, it weighs this and it does this and whatever. I just got them the picture, like what their army soldiers are currently doing in Poland in the winter. I'm like, you got them working on vehicles, like their hands are like turning purple, and
Wow.
like they may be able to work like 20 minutes a day. So like they're not effective, right? So imagine if they had a shelter that had like heat and whatever, and then by the way, we like manufactured it to meet, Army relocatable shelter standards, so we can get around like the government, not get around it, but be within the government procurement process. So I kind of like painted a picture of how their life would be better with the shelter. I just think going there, hey, look at my shelter, it's cool. And
Right.
I saw that a lot in military sales.
But
It's
that's
like,
true. It's certainly in industrial sales. And I think to a certain extent in software sales, I tell people nobody cares about your product. Nobody
no.
cares about your service. Nobody gives a shit. They don't want to get out of bed in the morning and spend time thinking about buying your stuff. All they care about is the outcome, how it changes their ability to do their business, take care of their customers.
I mean, even like my current job, like if I'm prospecting or if I'm doing a meeting with someone like you and you're interested, you're hiring reps. I don't go in there and say, hey, our reps are military and vets and they're hard and they got grit. What I say is like, hey, how many times have you hired someone and it didn't work out, right? Or like, how long is your hiring process?
Right.
Like, how many people have you missed because of your hiring
And how
process,
long are your
right?
territories empty because of that and everything
Yeah.
else?
And then so like, yeah, so I'm a big fan, to answer your question, of gap selling. So yeah, I have followed me. I do buy into that.
Got it. All right,
Yeah.
we're kind of coming up to the end of the conversation here. What worries you most about business today?
I think like what worries me the most is the business is turning away from like building. Like I think back probably before I was born, like businesses they were created to make a profit, but there was a second and third order effect of like creating jobs and bettering communities and stuff like that. So now we're like, hey, let's invest in something, try to build it up as quick as possible and like sell it.
Right.
And we'll fire anybody and hire anybody. It doesn't matter. It's just like the goal is just to get is profitable and have some sort of IPO or event as quick as possible. I think that's kind of scary. I just think it's like it is capitalistic, which I agree with, but I just think like if that's your goal, like that's why we're in the spot we are right now, or like people are just getting laid off like on Zooms at with like 300 people.
Yeah, there's unbelievable stories about that.
it's just nobody cares about anybody, man. Like,
And
yeah.
what do you think companies most often get wrong about sales?
I think that the worst thing you can do as a company is just worry about like the sell and not the long-term relationship, right? So like if you build a relationship, you're gonna have multiple sales, right? If you just worry about that one sale and you're willing to save or do anything to get it, most likely you're probably not doing it right. You're lying to them. You're not, whatever. But you're not going to come through. And then that
Right.
was a one-time deal. So like, you don't want to live a life of like having one-time deals all the time. You want to build like in SaaS, you want to build recurring revenue. But I'm sure in manufacturing, you want to have people come back
Sure.
and buy from you all the time,
Right.
right? So like I said, relationships, quick wins over like the long-term
Got it.
play. Yeah.
So if people want to reach you, learn more about Sean, learn more about Shift Group, where do they go? How do they catch up with you?
So like I told you, like I learned from the young kids. I got multiple screens, and always over here on the left, I have LinkedIn up, right? So like, that's because why I'm working on prospecting always and multitasking. So the best way to get always like, like connect with me and DM or direct message me in LinkedIn.
How many screens do you run at once?
Three right now.
And your phone too?
Yeah, and my phone. So like here's something, this might nobody's ever told you this. I had it and I learned this from this guy was a Florida State University kicker, and he's like one of the best account executives ever met, and he's only 24. He had it down to where like his clicks, like he had to do like the least amount of distance to
Wow.
like, I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but like when he was an SDR, he's like, hey, I can be on the phone talking to the guy, schedule the link, make an opt in Salesforce as efficiently as possible. And he like thought about his screens that way.
Wow.
Like, how can I make my screens, like set stuff up on my screens and make where I could do stuff the quickest so I could get more activity, right?
So for everyone in the industrial world that's listening to this and thinking about, well, gee, should I make one call or two calls today? Now you're hearing the way it works in a really high pressure, serious, carefully engineered sales environment.
Yeah, isn't that crazy though? So like I took that, like I try to set up my work environment where it's the easiest to do stuff so I can get more activity in there.
Got it. All right.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, you've been around the world, you've been in some dire situations, you've worked your ass off in a very competitive environment, you're growing a really interesting model. If a company really wants to succeed in sales, give us what in the military we might call the high level commander's intent. What's the high level guidance you would give to president, CEO, board members about what they need to do if their company is going to really succeed in predictably growing revenue?
Well, I'm gonna steal from the SOF, the Special Operations Forces truth is like humans are more important than hardware. So I think the success of your company is gonna come down to the people that you hire. So make sure your like hiring process and that the attribute of the people that you put in charge of hiring, not 21-year-old HR talent sourcers that are screening out Green Berets,
Right.
because I don't have a whatever on my resume, but make sure you're hiring the right people. And those are the people, and then you take care of them once you hire them and you train them. And like you said, you coach them and train them. And for sales, don't mess with people's money. Like it's the quickest way you lose your sales reps.
Yeah, there's a mic drop moment right there. So hire the right people, train them, coach them, and pay them. Don't screw around with their money.
Yeah,
Perfect.
don't mess with their money. Yeah.
All right, Sean, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your service. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate it.